There is a primal scream rising on this planet, and as many would argue, from this planet. Think of it as a boiling point of pain and disconnection, a culmination of disappointment, if you will, that we are unwilling, or even more concerning, that we are incapable of closing the gap between knowing better and doing better. In my work with young people, I hear a common refrain: I'm not suicidal, but I'm not sure I want to be here anymore. This is a clarion call that something's got to give. The New York Times refers to this slow death of the human condition as a pandemic of loneliness. Mental health practitioners refer to it as a crisis of global proportions, leading to ever-increasing rates of suicide, self-harm, addictions of all sorts, violence against others, and a population increasingly dependent on mood-stabilizing drugs just to function. Bottom line, we are struggling to exist in a world our nervous systems were not designed for. To exist in a perpetual state of fight or flight is the greatest theft of our human experience. We're being robbed of our potential to live a life of peace and harmony. Is there a way out of this path of self-annihilation and mutual destruction? I believe there is. My hypothesis is that if we are willing to go to school on our wounding, to remove shame and blame from our past, to find grace in all that has come before, and with even greater courage apply a lens of love to the present moment, our future can be radically and beautifully different from our past. Our failure to learn from our past forever binds us to the suffering of our ancestors. Our inability to meet this pain with compassion and wisdom is a key point of frustration for many. That frustration is the catalyst for this podcast. The Primal Scream podcast is an ongoing conversation with ordinary folks who have met their primal scream head-on and turned it into a powerful catalyst for change in their lives. They've stepped away from the performative expectations placed on them by their family and/or society, despite encountering resistance from within and external constraints along the way, leaving behind both the trauma of their story and the trauma drama that often ensues. Change is hard, but as these beautiful humans share their stories, we learn the intimacy of change is the opening to a life well lived. If you are feeling the existential dread of being alive on the planet at this time, you are not alone. If you're exhausted by the simple act of just being here, you are not alone. As you listen to these storytellers reveal their raw and real journeys to wholeness, it is our hope that you will find courage to do the same. Is there one message to take away from each of these podcasts? I believe there is, and it is simply this: you are not crazy, and you are not alone. Hi, welcome to the Primal Scream podcast. I'm here with a dear sister. Oh, we've been walking this path side by side for quite a while now. This is Courtney Adair, and I'm going to let her tell her story because she owns it beautifully. And one of the threads that we have woven together in our friendship over the years has been our awareness of the mother wound, for one, a willingness, a courage to step out of the path that we thought we belonged on and found some place where we met that need for belonging in a whole new way. And so, Courtney, I'm just going to jump right in and have you sort of go where your heart wants to go in this conversation. You know, how did we end up here? Tell it.
How did we end up here? I think I know. And I'm so grateful that this is where I'm at in this moment with you in this space. Yeah. Thank you for including me.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
I remember sitting on our porch. How long ago? 7 years ago, maybe. And and you were in tears. You had reached that place where there was clearly a fork in the road for you.
Yep.
You could no longer continue to be who you once were. You did not yet know who you were becoming, but you felt that beckoning in the becoming. There was something calling you forward. And I just remember having sat in that fork in the road myself, not far ahead of you, just really, truly, I feel like I'm maybe 10 seconds ahead of some folks when they sit on my porch. But you were at that crossroads. And so we're going to talk about a primal scream. We're going to talk about trusting. We're going to talk about leaning into and allowing and so there. Let's start with the fork in the road. Where were you and where did you end up?
I was so sick. I was not in a good place for many, many years. And my body, speaking of screaming, was screaming at me to listen to her. And I had so much shame and programming and conditioning that said, if you are experiencing struggle, it's because you're not good enough or you're not trying. And I had zero understanding of looking outside of myself to make adjustment. So I struggled with depression, and I wasn't treating my body well. I wasn't nourishing her, and I felt stuck in my job. Yeah, I was not doing well at all. And
Yeah.
And then, and a big part of that was the deep, deep grief over losing my dad. So I lost him when I was 30. Yeah. And I started to crawl towards some kind of sustenance, and that was yoga. And a dear teacher named Vicky showed me yoga in a way that could be so nourishing. And all of a sudden, my habitual pattern of beating myself up physically and emotionally started to shift. And I started to experience some gentleness. Yeah. And so I went to her class every Wednesday. And it was a studio that was carpeted, and the lights were really low. So even though it was at a gym, all of a sudden it wasn't this hardwood floor. You couldn't really see in the mirror. And yeah, that was a sweet, sweet experience.
As you describe it, it sounds very womb-like, that you found a place where you could disintegrate.
Yes.
Into your body.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm touched by your acknowledgement that your grief from your father's passing. I mean, it was that's about the time I met you, right after your dad had died, and he died of cancer. So there was an extended goodbye, long goodbye. Those are hard, and, you know, at the same time, I always say to people, it may not make sense in the moment, and the grief that you're experiencing today feels overwhelming.
Yeah.
And there may come a day where you can look back with deep gratitude.
Yeah.
Where that pattern interrupts.
Yes.
In your story, that it served as a, when I had an Achilles rupture, the doctor had done what he called, he'd done a surgery where he went in and he scraped all the scar tissue off of my Achilles.
Ooh.
And he called it exciting the wound. And he said, and then 10 days after he did this cleanup on my Achilles, it ruptured, right? And then I had to sit still for 6 weeks, and my whole world changed after that. But all that to say that sometimes things come into our field that excite the wounds, that help us. And he says it's to get more blood flow to an area that has been stagnant, that has been stale, that has been calcified in like what you just said is so powerful, Courtney. You talked about that you thought there was something wrong with you,
right?
That you couldn't figure this out.
Right.
Your hyper independent streak brought on by your mother wound. Like now we can sort of see how the whole thing just maps, right? But then you were taking all the responsibility for the things you had no control over, and none of the responsibility for the things you did have control over.
Yep.
And that's a big juxtaposition.
Yeah.
To engage with and then own that path. Does that make sense as I'm saying that?
Oh, my brain is just racing to decide which pathway
Jump in.
connects. I think first I just need to name that, I'm about to graduate, master's in clinical mental health psychology. I am deep in the process of writing my master's thesis capstone project, and the title is Wisdom of the Wound. Yeah. And
rich.
Yeah. Oh, it's a birth. And
yeah, it is.
Yeah. And something, so I just came back from the final retreat for my program. So the program is contemplative psychology and Buddhist psychotherapy. And so we go on retreat. This was our 5th and final one. And a dear friend in the cohort just lost his dad like a week prior to us arriving on the land. And so I was deep in conversation with him because the whole cohort has witnessed me grieving my dad, which was 8 years ago. And I'm still moving through it. A lot of times it feels like it happened yesterday. And so I was having a conversation with him about like the things that I didn't expect after losing my dad. And the world stopped making sense. It was like I woke up and the scaffolding for how I'd been living my life for 30 years just fell away. And it was not pretty.
Right.
Yeah. But so I'm so resonating with this, like, that wound being poked at and necessary, which of course, like, I wish my path didn't mean I had to lose my dad. Yeah, of course. And but that was like, that's what shook up structure.
The wisdom in the wound, right? Like loss, grief, sorrow, disconnection, all the grist for the mill for our growth.
Yes.
We can wallow in it. We can stay locked into the story of it, the woundology of our story.
I was great at that. I did that for years.
Me too. A queen of identifying with my wound, right? It became part of my persona, and that is true it's true of the human race.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the work to move from our woundology to our mythology, to find the wisdom in the wound.
Yep.
To claim our grace for all that has come before, and then to move into our lives in a new way.
Yep.
And so you went from losing your dad and that stirring things up to, I need to take better care of my body. And I dropped into the womb of yoga and met my body and my somatic expressions. And I know somewhere along the way you went to the jungle and found some voice there. Are you okay to speak about that?
Absolutely. So 2018, things came into alignment and I was able to travel to Peru to do my 200-hour yoga teacher training. I did it with the School Yoga Institute. Can't recommend them enough. Just incredible. And what was going on at the time was deep grief for my dad that I wasn't moving through, and grief can often so be like held in the lungs. And so there was collapse here, just so much congestion. I just finished competing at the US Open, where I had placed the best competitively that I had ever placed. And I had a severely injured hip and I was depressed. So this moment.
And so just for people that don't know, the US Open
right.
in our genre is West Coast Swing. And that's how I know you, because my kids are in West Coast Swing. And that's how we first met, is you were at the peak of your competitive time in that body of dance, traveling all over the world, pouring your body into this creative art in a beautiful and meaningful way, but also really doing some damage. To the body. So okay, keep going.
So I get on my first flight to Peru and I am freaking out. Oh my goodness. So much anxiety, which is not my norm. I usually go towards like super depressy. So much anxiety and fear. I hadn't traveled by myself in so long. I had never been to Peru. Like, this was, what am I doing? But I had booked my ticket. So here I am. Okay.
So I'm gonna dissect this a little bit, because what the gift of these conversations in my mind is to have other people begin to feel into these pivotal moments where you step out of your comfort zone, where you're following an inner guidance prompt that does not necessarily even make sense. It may not feel rational given the rationality you've been clinging to in your life. And yet there you are, you bought a ticket, you're on your way to Peru. You do not know what's coming ahead of you, except that you said yes to this sweet little girl inside of you that said, trust me, we're going to go do yoga. We are going to go learn something here about us and connect deeper. Like I tell people, the wisdom keepers never go away. They are the parts of ourselves that we left behind when we felt trauma and fracture in our story. And as we become more present, they get louder and louder and louder. And at some point, you just have to surrender and say, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And it does not make sense to anybody else, nor does it have to.
Right.
And this is where we start to break out of the construct of pleasing others and the codependencies of what will they think of me, and the story that is going to get, heaped onto me for doing this. You're being selfish. How dare you? And you're going to, and that little girl is going, yep. What's it to you? So here I am. I'm in Peru and I'm scared and I'm nervous. And
I just want to take one step backwards, because it's really, really overwhelming, the amount of choice that's out there. And so I just want to say that, like, once I said, okay, maybe I could learn how to teach yoga. That'll be great. I can, further my dance career. Here's another offering. I can work in a studio, right? This wasn't like, I'm going to do this to unleash that wasn't in the conscious field. So because I was traveling like over 40 weekends a year, I literally did a Google search for the time that I could do something for myself. And that's how I came across the program. So it wasn't like, I'm going to go to Peru and I researched all these schools. It was, this is literally the time that I have. So let's see if this is possible.
Isn't it interesting how the old life, one of my favorite quotes is, our new life is going to cost us our old life.
Yeah.
Right. But if you think of it in those terms right up front, that transactional conversation is too intense. It's too big. Right. But somehow, some way, the universe starts to dance with that interiority of our story and says, all right, you're gonna make room in this time frame to say yes. I'm gonna put you in a place where this yes is gonna serve you. And so there you were in Peru.
different than if you'd taken it in Canada or someplace else. Now you're in the jungle, woman, and you are in the deep field of medicine and lineage and healing beyond just the yoga paradigm. Did I tee that up right for you? There you are.
Yeah. And you're right, because it wasn't just yoga. This was yoga in Peru. So
in Peru,
3 things happened. I was there 21 days. 3 things happened. I don't remember the order, but one of them was, it wasn't my first Primal Scream. I know that, but it was perhaps the most powerful so far. And they did a holotropic breathing session. So you are consciously hyperventilating. And I got up out of that yoga shala and I ran outside and I screamed into the night.
Yeah.
Wow. And that scream like turned into laughter. And I saw a star and I said, "Hi, Dad." Yeah.
I love this. I love this piece. I'd like to weave a little story in here. When I first, these are such knowable places. You're going to have your version of this. Every human is walking in this same path, and there's going to be these moments of invitation. To go deeper, to know yourself more. And mine was to buy a motorhome and go to Burning Man. And go on a walk of it, right? So that was my Peru equivalent. And I remember getting in the motorhome and getting ready to drive off our property. And you know how steep our driveway is. And it was August on my way to Burning Man. And as I started to go down the hill, I put the brakes on to slow down a little bit because this 9,000-pound rig is now sliding in the dirt. And as I put on the brakes, it goes, and it goes into the ditch. And I'm like, and Steven's watching me from the porch. And I am certain that, this is, I'm leaving him behind, like almost like I know this is going to end my marriage. I was so ready to follow this thread no matter what. You reach a point where you are just done with who you were. You have to do something different. You have to break the hold on yourself, the log jam of trust. And so I back it up and I'm like, all right, this is it. I got to get off this property. I got people waiting for me at Burning Man. I'm doing this. I've come this far. I bought a motorhome against his best wishes. We're in a big fight about this thing. And so I start to go down the hill again and I've got it in first. I'm doing all the things. And I start to put on the brakes again, and I go even deeper into the ditch. And now I'm screaming. And I'm sure you can hear me up like, no, I'm not even going to get off the property. No. And I can feel my little 3-year-old, my 5-year-old, the 6-year-old, the 11-year-old, all my littles who have been encouraging me to do this, whispering in my ear, you can do this. It'll be okay. And so I back it up one more time and I'm just like, I just go, what do I have to do here to do this? And this message, like it was clear audio moment. And it was like, take your foot off the brake and go all in on you.
Oh, yep.
Take foot off the brake and go all in on you. And I'm like, if I don't put my foot on the brake, I don't know if I can make that turn at the bottom of our hill. Like this is a tricky thing in a vehicle, let alone a 9,000-pound RV. But I'm just like, all right, I'm going all in on me. This is it. I've waited my whole life to say yes to me. And I took my foot off the brake. And I softly made it around that corner. I got to the end of the driveway. And like you, there was this eruption, this scream, and then laughter.
Yeah.
Like childlike release. Like all my littles finally got to have a voice in my story, like they had been left behind so many years before. They finally had a moment. Are we right there? This is, you know what I'm saying, right? So there you are, you're laughing and the star winks at you and your dad is like, oh, Courtney, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I just had an experience on retreat where, again, like layers of grief coming through, and I couldn't hold my meditation posture, and I just flopped over into child's pose, and I just let the grief rack my body. And it was that like hyperventilating, like I'm in a room full of other meditators, but I'm like, here's what I need to move through. And then something happened where the deep like contraction and exhalation of my diaphragm turned into laughter. And once again, I experienced this spectrum of like grief and joy are the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And how ready the joy is to come forward. Like this little girl, she is just so happy to be let out. I tell people all the time, look, today my 3-year-old's in charge and I'm just keeping us safe. or when I got in the motorhome, the 11-year-old was in charge because I had spent a summer in a trailer with a girlfriend when I was 11 years old. And it was the first time I'd ever witnessed a normal family. And I sat there the whole summer thinking, why do my parents not act like this? He loves his children. He's not a predator. Like I felt so safe in the presence of my girlfriend's parents. It was the first emotionally corrective experience I had. And so I associated that with a motorhome. And so I was recreating that my 11-year-old was in charge and the 50 and 60-year-old was just keeping us safe while we figured all this out. Those littles, when they get to finally have a voice in the story, they're so happy. There's so much joy that's accessible, and they cry readily. The grief can come and they can rack it through the body and move it through. But I think we have so much fear that this well of grief is going to be so deep that we're going to drown in it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So I went and I saw a bereavement counselor. Maybe it was a year after my dad passed. And I showed up to the first session and I said, I'm going crazy. Like that's what's happening. Like I'm literally going crazy. I hadn't really experienced anxiety before. I wasn't showering. I could barely show up to teach. It was bad. And she said, oh, you're not going crazy. That's grief. Oh, okay. And something else I just shared with, my cohort mate was that something she said, or maybe I read it in a book, was you can't feel all of your grief at once because it would literally break your heart.
That's right.
Yeah.
It swamps you. You drown in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that fear of feeling it, whether it's grief or sadness or rage, or even the fear of feeling joy, that is so real. And I do kind of want to name, like, I love the metaphor of your ditch.
Thank you. It's real.
Oh, literally. Yeah. And, different folks have different levels and depths of the ditch that they get stuck in, whether that's habitual patterns, but then there's also like, in my ongoing effort to externalize, like, let me look at what's broken around me instead of saying I'm broken. Like, I just want to recognize that I have so much privilege in the ways that I've been able to reach for what nourishes me and what inspires me, and that different folks do not have that privilege. In fact, they have so much oppression that can make it impossible to leave that ditch. So just wanted to take a moment to just acknowledge my own context there. and how different that is from a lot of
I
people.
appreciate that. You're right. There are a lot of people who have to still get up every day and tend the family, tend the job, live in survival mode.
Yep.
And with that, for me, comes more responsibility to show up in a way that supports and facilitates access to those opportunities for others. Like this, I think that maybe is what caused you to follow the next big crossroads. So there you are in the jungle, and you're screaming and laughing.
Yeah.
And you come home, and then the old life doesn't work anymore.
It sure tried, and I sure collapsed, right? So the night before I was leaving, I was with my roommate, and I was like, I can't do this. So like, you know, perfectionism, talent, charisma. I am like one of the best of the teacher trainers, right? Trainees. Like I'm crushing it. I've got this dance background. But that night before I left, I'm like, I can't go home and teach a class. I'm not ready to get hired at a studio. I can't. And I went home and I absolutely collapsed in on myself. So I was not ready to sacrifice my old life for the new one at all.
Yeah.
And so I took this transformational journey that I had afforded myself, and I used it, and I got back into that ditch, and I said, look at what's wrong with me. I did all of this. I spent all this money and time, and I can't even do it. Yeah. Oh. And so what I really started to notice at that moment was, and I think that this is really, really true in capitalism structures and cultures, is that I could not allow myself any space to not know what was going to happen. I had to know exactly how I was going to change and what that was going to look like and what the finance, like I had to have it all in place. I couldn't dream. I couldn't give myself space to relax and for it to arise. It was like, no, that needs to be in place before I change how it happens.
Isn't it fascinating how we take the construct that we're trying to break out of, and then we take these courageous steps in our lives, but to fully go all in on you know, take the foot off the brake. We then start to impose all the things that we're leaving behind into this new story, this new chapter. At that moment, I found this quote that saved me, and I'm going to share it here because it's one that keeps me going every day. It's by Baal Shem Tov, and it's, if I must fall, and by the way, we all must, if I must fall, let me fall, for who I will become will catch me.
Yeah.
Like this great big swan song into you. You cannot bring the scaffolding of control and ego and protection that kept you locked into that old story into the new story. And so, we have these false starts, and we beat ourselves up because I went and spent all that money and I did that thing and I'm not any different today, but you are.
Yeah.
It isn't one choice. It isn't one fork in the road. It's a daily choice and a daily fork in the road to remember the path that you want to be on.
Yes. Which is great, because that means you can't miss it. Like, it's not a one-shot deal.
No, that's right.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you do have those setbacks, you just go, okay, all right, I see that. I see that. Okay, I'm honoring that there's still some concern and fear about economics, and I'm on, and so maybe I need to have a little bit of scaffolding, but I call it crossing the Rubicon of self-love. Once you go, there's no going back. You cannot unring that bell. No. So now you have this new navigation of trust. And it's baby steps in the beginning, and then it's big leaps.
Yep. Yeah.
Big leaps.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned self-love, and in Peru, was the first time I was 30, 32 maybe. It was the first time that I'd ever heard my own thoughts. The
Say
first time.
more.
Yeah, first time I'd ever witnessed what was going on in my mind. So that was
Right.
like the very first like birthing of that externalization.
Yeah.
And I heard my thoughts, and my heart broke because they were so cruel. They were so
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Like for
I love
someone, Mhm.
no, I love Michael Singer's book, Untethered Soul. If anybody hasn't read that book, you have to read that book. The first 3 chapters, he talks about the noisy, um,
Mhm.
shitty roommate in our head who is just so
Oh,
cruel,
so
just
cruel.
unrelenting anger and frustration, and how dare you, and even calling self-love selfish, like how
Oh,
dare you
yeah.
do something, and he says, "Well, you know that you're on the path when you can hear that voice and then go to observer mode,
Yeah.
that you are not that voice."
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so at 32, you found your observer. You
Yeah.
found your,
Yeah. And that
yeah,
for me, and that was like that I wasn't even capable yet of becoming like the higher S self or the observer, or at least listening from that place. And so that became yoga. So that
yeah,
became like different way of being in the world and being in my body, and a belief system that stepped in when I wasn't ready to be that
yeah,
yet.
yeah,
And coming back to like the wisdom of the wound, how I'm understanding this as I'm researching my thesis, and I'm really diving into this book, which is amazing, The Politics of
yeah,
Trauma, is how Stacey Haynes, who wrote the book, speaks about it, is honoring and recognizing what my survival strategies were.
right.
Right. So shifting from even looking at it as like a habitual tendency, but it's like, how did I get to where I'm at now? And can I
Mm,
honor what I had to do in order to make it this far?
right.
Right.
Navarrete would call it your coping mechanisms, survival strategies. This was a child, a wounded child, an abandoned child, if we go deep into the mother wound, who had to figure it out on her own. And so rather than shaming ourselves for surviving,
Right.
we shift into this appreciation
Yes.
for what we had to do to get to this moment. And then we gain our agency over what comes next. Yeah.
Yes. And so like if, I wouldn't change any step that I've ever
No.
taken.
Nope.
And, if say 32-year-old Courtney walked into my therapy office, like what I would offer her now from my current seat is, this scaffolding, right? Me trying to take like the old life and bring all of that into the new one that I wanted. It's like, how do we honor these survival strategies? And then
Right.
how do we start to update the programming? Like
Yes.
what are the new strategies that you want to have choice over? Because it's really scary to just go, this doesn't work. And it's like, okay, how can we start the blueprint of like, what do you want? Which is a scary question. What would be possible if that wasn't there anymore? Yeah, that's
And
how I
what no
would.
longer serves us. Like some of my survival strategies was like I became very competent at things beyond reproach. Like
Exactly.
if I do everything right, then nobody can come down on me and critique me.
Yep.
And that became performative
Mm,
for a long period in my life. But when I looked at some of those survival strategies, when they go from being performative to selective, like I'm really grateful for how competent
yeah.
I was able to become in my life. So
Yeah.
some of those still serve me today,
Yeah.
and others do not. And so it becomes a sorting process with love and compassion.
Yep.
What works for me, what doesn't work for me. Like You don't have to throw away all of who you were. Your personality, your beauty, your call it the beauty of your expression, however that came to be. That's not all bad. That's now you get to sort of like play with that more and more. And I think sometimes people think that ego is bad. And
No.
and I don't think it is. I think it's part of it's the color of the flower that you are. It's the smell of the rose that you became. It's all of that is beauty. It's what becomes a mechanism of survival rather than a tool to bring you into your highest expression. So you start sorting and you do it with kindness. For yourself.
Yes. And then also, like, you know, mother wound wise, you start to have choice over, like, so I experience perfectionism, the ways it kept me safe. And that wasn't only like a family system thing. That's like how that kept me safe in school, how that kept me safe as, you know, a woman. Like, so many different systems create these survival strategies, right? But now I get to have choice of when I bring that perfectionism online. Right. And then I really know, hopefully, I'm getting a little bit more attuned to myself. How do I take care of myself in the before and after when the perfectionist is driving the bus?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there are big things we still want to create in this world, and having some skills to do that is not a bad thing, right? And what is the balance that we need to achieve in our lives, that we aren't just burning ourselves out? When I met you, you were burned out. You had fried your nervous system. You had fried your skeletal, musculoskeletal, like you were fried. I speak a lot these days about this, what I call a neuro emergency, that we across this planet are having a major meltdown. Like our if we think of ourselves as computers and our hardware, like we buy new computers every 2 to 3 years because it just starts to slow down. Nothing quite functions the same, and we do all of the cleanup and tools, but it's never quite the same as the new computer when we first got it, because now it's burdened by all of this software that we aren't using, and we don't even know where to go get it anymore. And so there's a rebooting that happens in our lives, but some of that software is still useful, and we have to go back, get the good software, release the fear. You know, our operating system is love, and fear is a malware that has infected our code. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And we don't have to have any shame about this process. In fact, when we do it in community, we can laugh at ourselves. We can laugh at each other, not because we're shaming each other, but like, oh, look at us. Here we are looping around this same stuff. We don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah. And, you know, shame is one of the most powerful protectors. Yeah. You know, if we feel shame, then sometimes we don't have to feel helplessness. Yeah. Shame actually allows us to find some control. Yeah. Oh,
it allows us to play small too.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of fully engaging with our light and our beauty and our essence, we can stay in the more reserved, I can't do that mode.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So now you're, I loved when you said, you know, what would I say to 32-year-old Courtney sitting in the seat of now, you know, somebody who's done a lot of hours with other people who are going through this same process. What is that like for you? What does that feel like to go from, I guess, being the wounded to the wounded healer? You know, is that do you own that structure, or do you have another way of holding on to that idea?
Yeah. Um, I don't know how I relate to the wounded healer.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But what I will say is, so I used to be so afraid of speaking my goals, so I would call them go owls. Um, yeah, because I felt like if I set a goal, that meant that I had to accomplish it, right? Perfectionism coming online. I wasn't dare to dream, and
Mm.
so
Or dare
I'll
to fail.
right,
Dare to
exactly,
fail. Right?
exactly, allow
Yeah.
myself to fail. But
Yeah.
one of the books I'm going to write, in addition to like my clothing line and my retreat center that I'm going to open, um, one of the books is going to be called "Why Everyone Should Go to Therapy School, but Not Everyone Should Be a Therapist."
Oh, perfect.
Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah. So I'm getting the education that I wish every child was given. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Wow. So the work of sitting with someone else in their deepest, darkest moments, I have to be doing that work myself.
Yeah.
Because how arrogant would it be for me to sit here and say, I know what's wrong with you. I
Yeah.
know what you need to do. That's not it at all. That's not the work. The work
Mm-mm.
is diving in with my own therapist and in community to see the darkest parts of myself and love them so deeply and honor them and witness them and share them. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, this term shadow work is bantered about a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to hear your definition of shadow work, because I think a lot of people are really, um, they're touching the edges of it, but not really understanding the beauty of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. So I have lots of different ways of thinking about it, but because I just came back from this retreat, I'll talk about it in terms of the Buddha family energies or the wisdom energies. And this comes from the Shambhala tradition and lineage. So we work as a program with 5 different Buddha family energies. And people joke all the time about like we're in a cult, and I love it. And I don't want to minimize the harm cults do, but part of what we do is that we go on retreat into Maitri space awareness rooms, and they are the color of the wisdom energies. So I'll talk about one specifically. So Ratna. Ratna is yellow. It is a room that is completely yellow, yellow carpet, yellow lighting, yellow walls. Everything is yellow. 2 big circles. You go in, you hold this posture of like, give me, give me, give me. And you experience the wisdom and the neuroses of this Ratna energy. And so when I think
totally.
about shadow work, it's like nothing is inherently bad,
Right.
but how we're in relationship to it can cause us pain, or it can bring us a lot of like abundance, which is the wisdom side of Ratna. So Ratna is that like hungry ghost realm. So if my shadow is hungry ghost, huge belly, really, really small throat, I can never actually feed myself to the point where I'm satiated. So I just keep consuming. The wisdom of that is understanding natural abundance. So for me,
Mm,
shadow work is again that like survival strategy of like, why are you here? What do you need? Like, what need were you actually bringing me? Like, how were you being satisfied? And then how can we follow that path and then
mm.
see how that actually is on that same spectrum? And when do you start to become moving towards light?
So as you say that, what comes up for me is and I love Gabor Mate for bringing this conversation so mainstream, the power of addiction
Yes.
in that hungry ghostness of our story, that unmet wounding part of our
Yes.
story.
Yeah.
And you know, the shadow is what's behind the depression, the anxiety, the rage, all of those are messengers
Yeah.
For the unmet parts of ourselves that are saying, slow down, wait a minute, don't, you're living a life that's not, we're not all with you. This is not working for all of us.
Right.
And so I love that yellowness of abundance, big bright light, sunshine,
Earth.
earth, in the Dagara cosmology, which is I think that was my version of going in to become the student without necessarily becoming the therapist, right? The earth cosmology, that piece of it is yellow and grounded, and with that shadow work, I call it, there's a beckoning in our becoming, and then there's a reckoning in the beckoning. And the shadow work is the reckoning in the beckoning. Like if you want to move forward in your life, if you want to free yourself of the shackles of the scaffolding that was survival oriented, there is this work that we have to do. We have to go meet that shadow as though it is a wounded child in our field, and meet it with love and compassion, and hold it with appreciation for how it got us to this moment. I loved what you said about you wouldn't change a thing about your history. Like you reach a place in your life where no matter what has come before, you can find grace for it all, and you find the wisdom in the wound, right?
Yeah.
That's your whole, that is the trajectory of enlightenment. And I call it rational enlightenment. Let's not even put a deity aura around it. It's just, this is how we come into wholeness. This is the path. And it feels really good to have some agency, to not be subject to reacting from a wounded place all the time, but be able to consciously respond to what's happening. So I get a trigger, and then I have a moment. We call it the Frankl pause. Viktor Frankl's, the key to peace and harmony in our life is to create a little space between stimulus and response, to have that conscious response to what's happening in our world. That's, for me, that's as good as it gets.
Yeah. And I will say something about like pop psychology, right? So there's so much incredible content out on social media. There's also a lot of harmful content. And what I'm noticing with, it's not even clients, it's just with people who are on the receiving end of so much pop psychology. And this is, again, makes so much sense. People recognize their own shadow. They go, oh yeah, that's me too. Oh, and I'm not alone. And then there's a lot of constriction that I see happens where they identify with the shadow. So I see this with like the attachment styles. Oh, I'm avoidant. And then it starts to become the new narrative. And I understand that like we're all in relationship to diagnoses and to recognizing ourselves in the collective in different ways. And this is a journey. And that's why I'm so grateful that we get to talk about the other side of the journey, right?
Yeah.
In the hopes that folks can feel the power and the tenderness in recognizing their shadow. And then, like, how can I start to have a different relationship with it?
Right.
Can I have that pause? And then there's choice, there's response, repair becomes available. Manifestation becomes available.
You know, I so appreciate you bringing in the social media, the TikTok, the like, everybody is sharing their process out loud, healing out loud. And it can be messy. It can be narcissistic. And I think of it as being sort of a naive narcissism. It's like a child finally figuring something out and wanting to tell everybody about it. And that's a beautiful thing. And there reaches a point where we have to recognize that we've just substituted our wound for this new pop psychology, and we never go any further than that. We never get to the place where that is no longer driving our narrative. And so how would you help people move out of their woundology, the story, the narrative, the identification with the wound, and to stop looping in that space and to move past it? What's your magic formula there, or the one you're grinding out in your own life right now? Because you know you are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So first of all, I've been having this spicy thought recently because I see the word narcissist all over the place.
Me too.
So my spicy thought, and I say this not to make excuse for people who have experienced harm from someone that they view as narcissistic. I'm not so sure that narcissism exists.
I'm right there in that spiciness with you. I think it's levels of separation from self.
Yeah.
And there are people that are so completely disconnected from self, their innocence, that they become malignant in their expression. But we all fall on that spectrum of separation from self. And narcissism is looking for somebody to help me figure out what this is.
Yeah.
Looking for some kind of external feedback until we can have enough interiority to give it to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, I can hear anyone's story and have compassion.
Yeah.
And that's been one of the deepest trainings of Buddhist psychotherapy for me, is just the deepest well of compassion. And so I experience folks who might be labeled as narcissistic, and I just go, trauma. Also just like who's given the privilege in our society to show up in that way and for it to be okay, versus whose bodies are not allowed to like talk about themselves or to believe in themselves. Yeah. So I get curious about internal experiences of trauma response, and then the external conditions that we put on certain folks and not others. Yeah.
So this neuroemergency that we're in, where people are, interesting statistic came from a pediatrician. He said 10 years ago, his practice, he had about 10% of his children diagnosed with some kind of mental illness, depression, anxiety, etc. He says now it's about 60%. And half of those are self-harming in some way. And so to me, that feels like an emergency. This is, break glass, pull the lever, stop. Our children are on the bleeding edge of our collective unconsciousness, and it's not okay. It's just not okay.
Yeah.
And what stimulates, and we'll call it exciting the wound again, me to keep showing up in these conversations, is my wounded child, my inner child is really activated right now as I see what's happening in Palestine, when I see what's happening in our own backyards with self-harming, with what happened in COVID. The children were just left behind, and the machine just kept rolling over to keep the capitalist thing happening still. I mean, in a wise society, we would have shut the whole thing down. We would have let everybody figure out how to stay home and take care of each other. Like, I look at COVID as a leveling event that was a precursor to much greater leveling events that are coming for us as a species. Climate is a slow moving, but now accelerating leveling event. What's happening, the natural disasters are going to become catastrophic. And if we cannot begin to engage with our collective story, our collective shadow, the way that you have done it individually, the way I'm doing it, the way millions of people are showing up ready to hold hold this moment. I can't blame my parents. They were a product of their parents and their generation. And, like there is no one to blame for how we got here. It is what we choose to do in this moment that makes the difference going forward. Not holding people accountable. Boundaries for sure. We won't tolerate this anymore.
Yeah, right.
We're not gonna accept giving up our body autonomy
Right.
to somebody's theological delusions. We reached a point where we're just saying enough. And I feel this, and maybe this is where we'll kind of wrap this primal scream, this collective primal scream. When I had my primal scream, it was both mine initially, but then I got all my scream. I think there's maybe more, but right now the layer that I'm aware of is released. And by the way, I do think there's more. There's just only so much you can release at one time, so much the tenderness. We call it the Kundalini spiral, where we just gain more insight and more awareness and more observer. And, we see the same situation through a different lens each time we're ready to go engage with it again. There is a collective scream that I'm able to tap into, and I have felt it my whole life. And I think a lot of people feel it. And I listen so much, like we're labeling so much of our neuroemergence now as ADHD and autism and spectrum. And I have this sense that this neuroemergency is in service to this neuroemergence. That this collective crash that we're in right now, this what we've each gone through. You described it. You just at 30, you just hit a wall. You couldn't go any further. And you couldn't get out of bed. You couldn't get dressed. You couldn't shower. You couldn't think. You couldn't put two constructive activities in a row. Everything was exhausting. There's an existential exhaustion. There's the trauma that we experience ourselves. There's our lineage trauma. And then there is the existential trauma of our collective shadow now coming to the surface. And then add to that what's happening with the planet. And we're in a moment, a really important fork in the road moment coming forward as a collective species. And I think the primal scream is both a release, but also a birthing canal, a gauntlet, the shadow that we have to work ourselves through, the womb that we have to emerge from in order to embrace our light, this big yellow room of abundance and grace and possibility. And I think this neuroemergence, how my neurospiciness and my grandson's neurospiciness, and I have it runs in my family. I got a brother or a grandson, like that. But I think it now runs in our species because we are being asked to address our human construct through a whole new lens of perception that neurospicy brains seem to have. Like they have an acute sensitivity to justice and balance and overwhelm to the assault on our senses that just doesn't work anymore. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this concept of neuroemergency, bringing us to a place of neuroemergence where we can build a new story together. That's kinder to our nervous system.
So this entire time that we've been chatting, I'm playing with my new puppet, little pink T-Rex puppet. So I don't identify in terms of neurospiciness, as you said, and this is the beauty of a cohort model, is that there's several folks in the cohort who have different intersections with neurospiciness. And wow, I have learned so much about my own nervous system from seeing how other folks attune to theirs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I get really curious about old scaffolding of like, this is how minds are allowed to show up and be successful. And now I'm seeing this celebration of so many different ways of interacting with the world and with learning and with creativity and with communication and boundary. Yeah. So I just really want to honor all the different minds that are out there. And
not pathologize it necessarily.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I mean, I don't believe in the DSM. Anyways, so I should.
We'll just let that float off into the ether, but that's a big statement, isn't it?
Yeah, the DSM hasn't been supportive in my therapeutic journey. So I'll say that. And I know there are reasons why billing insurance and getting folks access the DSM is also a benefit. Looking at the wisdom and the constriction and everything. So this is a not totally connected thought, but it's here. How I'm viewing this like moment in time and this like something's got to change is I have deep, deep curiosity about what it says about our mother wound and everyone's mother wound, that this is how we are treating Mother Earth.
They're connected in my mind as well. Absolutely.
And that pain and that tension of abusing our own mother to where it is not inhabitable and she is lashing out and saying no more. That's and right. We're continuing like that sits deep in every being's body.
Yeah.
Whether it's conscious or not. But I know that people are experiencing the symptoms of that deep, yeah.
And some might not experience it as what we think of as a primal scream. They might experience it as a knot in their back.
Yeah.
I heard somebody describe a brick in their belly the other day. The soma, our bodies, carries that heaviness, that density of fear and panic in this human like people are at a level of panic. That's what the anxiety and the depression and the suicidal ideation and Ben, and bless his heart, came to me and said, I don't want you to worry, Mom, I'm not suicidal, but I'm not sure I want to be here. Like I run into so many people who are right at that edge of this humaning thing is really hard work right now. And if we continue to brush it aside and pretend it isn't happening, we're only exacerbating the pain. But I believe that these conversations, and I'm super grateful to have this one with you, begins to illuminate, bring light into the darkest part of this work that we have to do. That, there's some heavy lifting that needs to happen here, but we can do this. We can do this together.
Absolutely. And human beings roamed Mother Earth for centuries and lived in right relationship. And that's so right. It isn't like I need to discover this new science. No, it's all, And how have we taken away the wisdom of indigenous folks who we're doing this in beautiful harmony, you know? Yeah. How can we get out of the way? How can we amplify the voices that know exactly what to do? Yeah.
I fully believe that we are right at the edge of a big all-in moment. Take the foot off the brake and go all in on us. And that each person who has ever done that individually can hold the hand of somebody who is still afraid to take that big leap forward into trust One of my big downloads early on is we are here to fall in love with trust, to trust this human experience, even as messy and dysregulating as this moment is all around us. It is in service to creating the conditions of shift. We're birthing a new story, and it is bloody. It's messy. There's gonna be some screaming involved. There's some heavy breathing involved, and nobody says to the birthing mother, "Oh, stop! This looks too hard," because we know that on the other side there is such beauty and potentiality giving birth to something. And I feel like maybe that's where the feminine rising is going to play the biggest part in ushering in the new story and holding. And I don't mean that from a gender perspective. I mean the rising feminine in the masculine form and the feminine form. And so to be continued.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've got a ton of hope. I have so much trust. And I say that after traveling into the darkest of the dark.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And that's my message too. You know, when I went around and did the Joji experiment, and I measured hope at the beginning of those sessions and at the end, and people just being in a room with other people who are doing their shadow work, who are doing the dark night of the soul stuff, who have come through layers of grief to find the joy and the laughter on the other side of it. And to see, oh, I'm not alone and I'm not crazy and we can do this. Then the hope went from, you know, like it raised in one group by only 20 points, but in another group by 74%. Like hope is here for us. We're right there. And the more that we can speak to that out loud, this is a hard time. We're birthing a new story and it's going to be messy. But those of us who are midwives to the new story, having midwifed it within our own wombs of possibilities, we got this. Yeah. Thank you, Courtney. I love you so much. It's great to be on this path with you, sister. May it be so. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Primal Scream podcast. We appreciate your willingness to sit in the pain and exploration of a fellow human. It is our hope that you found a thread that you can weave into your own story going forward. There is great beauty on the other side of the primal scream. A wise elder once said, "We are the ones we've been waiting for." And we are not waiting any longer for someone or something to shift the human story from fear to love. It's on us to redeem ourselves from our individual and collective unconsciousness, to find our ease of beingness. The future belongs to those who show up. We'll leave you with the song Like the Children Do by Meredith McHenry. She reminds us that the way home is the path of innocence reclaimed. See you on the next podcast. Have a beautiful day.
Put down your armor, I'll put mine down too. We'll do like the children know how to do. We'll fill up a pail with the pain they caused you. We'll pour it all out like the children do. Don't get me wrong, you can't walk over me. But I'm strong enough to hold you when you're weak. I know I fucked up and you sure have too. So let's just start over like children do. just go back to the time before our innocence was stolen. I don't know how to get us there, but I'll keep hoping. I'll keep hoping to do like the children do. We can do like the children do. I'll open my bleeding heart to you. Let's just pretend for a minute or two that our hearts can bend without shattering through. We'll find that forgiveness as if we're brand new, and you'll walk through the fire like it can't burn you. Back to the time before our innocence was stolen. I don't know how to get us there, but I'll keep trying. I'll keep trying. Children do. We can do like the children do. I'll open my filthy hands to you. Can't we do like the children do? Can't we do like the children do? 'Cause I don't want to say goodbye to you. Put down your armor, I'll put my